"You're just the quiet daughter," my stepfather said, into the microphone. "A few years in the Navy doesn't make you important." The room laughed. My mother lowered her eyes. That hurt more than his words. I stood beside the banquet table, saying nothing, while Rick enjoyed the attention. Then my phone vibrated. One message, 6 characters, Raven 7. My stomach tightened. It was the emergency code my mother and I had created 17 years ago. The code she promised she would only send if she could not safely tell me the truth herself. Across the room, a retired colonel suddenly froze. He stared at my phone screen, then at me, and for the first time that night, someone looked worried. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I was 41 years old that night, a retired naval intelligence officer living in Norfolk, Virginia. Most people in that banquet hall knew me as the quiet daughter. That was the role my stepfather preferred. My father had died when I was 16. 2 years later, my mother married Rick Dawson, a successful contractor who loved being the center of every room he entered. At first, I tried to earn his respect. Then I spent years realizing he never intended to give it. To Rick, military service was something he admired from a distance, but rarely understood. He loved veterans as long as they appeared in parades, documentaries, or speeches. Living with one was different, especially a woman. Whenever relatives asked about my career, Rick would answer before I could. "Nothing exciting," he'd say. "Mostly paperwork." Or, "She wasn't kicking down doors. Trust me." People laughed. I learned to let them. Explaining myself never changed anything. My mother usually stayed silent. That silence hurt more than Rick's jokes. The truth was that much of my work had been classified. I couldn't tell family members where I went, who I worked with, or why I disappeared for months at a time. So Rick filled the empty spaces with his own version of my story. Over the years, people started believing it. The emergency code was my mother's idea. 17 years earlier, before one of my deployments, she handed me a small card. "If I ever send this code," she told me, "it means I can't safely tell you something out loud. No questions, just trust me." We never used it, not once. Until tonight. I slipped my phone back into my purse and looked around the crowded hall. Laughter continued, glasses clinked, a country song played softly through the speakers. Yet suddenly, none of it felt normal anymore. Then I noticed something else. The retired colonel who had reacted to the message was still staring at me. Colonel Daniel Harper. His expression had completely changed, not confusion, recognition, as if he knew exactly what Raven 7 meant. And before I could decide whether to approach him, I turned toward my mother's table and felt my chest tighten. Her chair was empty. For a moment, I told myself there was a simple explanation. Maybe my mother had stepped outside. Maybe she was talking to one of her friends. Maybe I was letting an old emergency code scare me for no reason. But deep down, I knew better. I walked through the banquet hall, checking the lobby, the patio, and the hallway leading to the restrooms. Nothing. My mother's purse was still hanging on the back of her chair. Her half-finished glass of iced tea sat untouched beside her plate. She hadn't planned to leave. A knot formed in my stomach. When I returned to the main room, Rick was standing near the microphone again. Apparently, my absence had become part of the entertainment. "There she is," he announced with a grin. "Our secret agent." Several people laughed. I stopped near the back of the room. "Did you find the enemy, Sarah?" Rick asked. More laughter. I didn't answer. That only encouraged him. You know, for 20 years we've been hearing about her mysterious military career." He reached beneath a table and pulled out a small wooden box. My pulse immediately quickened. My metal box, I hadn't brought it. Someone had taken it from my mother's house. Rick opened the lid and held it up for everyone to see. "Look at this stuff," he said. "You'd think she won World War III by herself." The room erupted again. A cousin shook his head and chuckled. An uncle lifted his drink. Even people who seemed uncomfortable stayed silent. That part always hurt the most. Not the loud voices, the quiet ones. I remained still. People mistake silence for surrender. I had learned long ago that restraint can be sharper than anger. Rick picked up one of the medals. "Can anybody tell me what this one means?" he joked. "Because I guarantee Sarah can't." The laughter started again, then suddenly stopped. Not all at once, one person at a time. Like dominoes falling backward. I followed everyone's gaze. Colonel Daniel Harper was standing. His eyes were fixed on the contents of the box, not the medals. A small mission patch tucked beneath them. A black raven against a silver shield. His face had gone completely pale. Slowly, he walked toward Rick. The room grew quiet enough for me to hear the air conditioning. Rick forced a smile. "What, something funny?" Colonel Harper didn't smile back. He pointed directly at the patch. Then he looked at me. His voice was low, careful, almost disbelieving. "Ms. Mitchell," he swallowed. "Where did you get the raven patch?" For a few seconds, nobody moved. Rick still held the metal box in his hands. Colonel Harper never took his eyes off the raven patch. "Sarah," he said quietly, "answer me." I looked at the patch. "I earned it." The colonel released a slow breath. The room remained silent. Rick laughed nervously. "Come on, Colonel. It's just an old patch." "No," Harper said. His voice was firm enough to stop Rick cold. "It is not." He stepped closer and carefully lifted the patch from the box. I could see memories moving behind his eyes, memories I had spent years trying not to revisit. "Do you know what raven was?" he asked Rick. Rick shrugged. Some office assignment. Several people chuckled. Nobody else did. Harper looked around the room. "Raven was a joint intelligence task force." The laughter vanished completely. "It supported hostage recovery operations and high-risk military missions." A champagne glass stopped halfway to someone's lips. I wished he would stop. Not because he was wrong, because I had spent most of my adult life avoiding conversations like this. I never wanted my service to become a performance. Harper turned toward me. "Were you Raven 7? I hesitated, then nodded. The room felt smaller, 1,000 miles away. Another night flashed through my mind. Northern Iraq, a dim operations center, monitors glowing blue in the darkness, an intelligence feed that suddenly revealed the hostages had been moved. I remembered staring at the screen. I remembered arguing for a delay. I remembered commanders making a difficult decision based on information my team uncovered. The rescue team reached the new location hours later. Every hostage came home alive. I never met most of them. I never wanted credit. The mission report was classified. The people involved moved on with their lives. So did I. Harper's voice pulled me back to the banquet hall. I was there. The words landed like a weight. Several guests exchanged confused looks. Rick's smile disappeared. "What do you mean?" "You were there." Harper looked directly at him. "I was part of the recovery force." The room went so quiet, I could hear a chair creak somewhere behind me. Harper pointed toward me. Her analysis changed that operation. Nobody laughed now. Nobody even looked at me. They were all staring at him, at the colonel, at the man whose expression made it impossible to dismiss the truth. Then Harper's eyes shifted back to Rick, and his next sentence changed everything. There is something else connected to Raven 7. He paused. Something hard settled into his expression. And I don't think you want this room hearing it. Rick tried to recover with a laugh. The problem was that nobody laughed with him. Okay, he said, forcing a smile. So, Sarah had some important military job. That's great. What does that have to do with anything tonight? For the first time all evening, he had no audience left. People were watching him now the way they had been watching me. Carefully, critically. Colonel Harper folded his arms. Before he could answer, the doors at the back of the hall opened. Every head turned. My mother walked inside. Beside her was a woman in a navy blue suit carrying a leather folder. Relief hit me so hard, I almost lost my breath. "Mom," she gave me a small nod. Then she looked at Rick. The warmth disappeared from her face. The woman beside her approached the front of the room. "I'm Karen Ellis," she said. "Mrs. Dawson's attorney." A murmur spread through the crowd. Rick's expression tightened. "What is this?" My mother answered. "The truth." The room fell silent again. Karen opened the folder. For the past 6 months, Linda Dawson has been reviewing financial records related to jointly owned property. Rick immediately interrupted. "This isn't the place. It became the place," my mother said quietly. "When you spent years humiliating my daughter in public, nobody moved, nobody looked away." Karen continued. "The review uncovered multiple unauthorized transfers, forged signatures, and concealed accounts. A fork slipped from someone's hand. The sound echoed through the room. Rick's face turned white. "That's ridiculous!" I finally understood why my mother had sent the emergency code. She hadn't needed a soldier. She had needed an investigator. For years, intelligence work had trained me to spot patterns, inconsistencies, and hidden connections. Several weeks earlier, my mother had quietly shown me copies of financial statements she didn't understand. I had seen irregularities immediately. At the time, I assumed there was an innocent explanation. Now, I knew there wasn't. Rick looked around desperately. Nobody came to his defense. Not one person. Colonel Harper stepped forward. "You spent years telling people she was insignificant." His voice was calm. "But the moment your wife needed someone she could trust with the truth, she called Sarah." The room went so quiet, I could hear the hum of the lights overhead. Rick opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Nothing came out. I looked directly at him. Then I said the only thing that mattered. I was never hiding who I was. "Rick," my voice stayed steady. "You were just avoiding the truth." My mother wiped a tear from her cheek. Then she spoke. "There's one more thing Sarah deserves to know tonight." My mother stood in front of the room and took a slow breath. For the first time in years, she looked tired. Not physically, emotionally. The kind of tiredness that comes from carrying a truth for too long. She looked at me. "Sarah, I owe you an apology." The words hit harder than I expected. Around us, nobody spoke. "I should have defended you years ago," she continued. "Not tonight. Not after the evidence. Years ago." Her voice trembled. "Every time Rick mocked your service, every time he dismissed your sacrifices, every time he made you smaller so he could feel bigger, I stayed quiet. I felt something loosen inside my chest, not because the pain disappeared, because someone was finally willing to name it. My mother wiped her eyes. The emergency code wasn't only about the financial records. I looked at her. Then, what was it about? She smiled sadly. It was my way of telling you that I was finally ready to stop choosing peace over truth. The room remained silent. A few relatives lowered their eyes. Others looked away completely. For years, they had laughed because it was easier than asking questions. Now, they had answers. Rick stood alone near the microphone. No supporters, no applause, no audience, just consequences. His attorney would deal with the legal issues. The financial investigation would continue. But in that moment, something more important happened. People stopped believing his version of the story. And once that happened, he had nothing left to stand on. Colonel Harper stepped beside me. He looked around the room. Then he said something I would remember for the rest of my life. Honor isn't measured by how loudly someone talks about their service. His eyes met mine. It's measured by how much they carry without demanding recognition. Nobody argued. Nobody could. A few minutes later, guests quietly began leaving. Conversations were softer now, more thoughtful, more honest. As for me, I didn't need revenge. I didn't need a public victory lap. I didn't need Rick's approval. I never had. I walked outside with my mother into the cool Virginia evening. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she reached for my hand, and I let her. The code Raven 7 had been created for emergencies. That night, it became something else. Proof that silence is not weakness. Proof that truth eventually finds its voice. And proof that self-worth begins the moment you stop asking permission to be seen. If this story stayed with you, take a moment and think about the people who have ever underestimated you simply because you chose dignity over noise. Sometimes the strongest people in the room are the ones who never feel the need to prove themselves. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Which moment affected you the most? Have you ever experienced a time when someone misunderstood your silence for weakness? And let us know where you're watching from. It's always inspiring to see this community gathering from all across America and around the world. If stories about honor, resilience, truth, and quiet justice mean something to you, please like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories just like this one. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next story. One of the most valuable lessons in life is that you do not need everyone to understand your journey in order for it to matter. Sometimes the people closest to you will underestimate your sacrifices, question your worth, or fail to see the strength it took to keep going. But your value is not determined by their recognition. True confidence comes from knowing who you are, even when nobody is applauding. Stay faithful to your principles, protect your dignity, and let your actions speak louder than your explanations. If this message touched your heart, leave a comment and tell us what lesson stayed with you. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about courage, honor, resilience, and quiet justice.